Should the San Francisco 49ers let Brock Purdy find out how valuable he is on the market? Woo! We got a lot of discussions and talking about the combine here on Locked On NFL.
The barbershop is open and Tony Wiggins has a chair for you. He's ready with some real NFL talk. The local experts of Locked On bring their expertise, and Wiggy is ready with his clippers and shears. Sit down and enjoy. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You got that right. It's your team every day, and we thank you for making us your first listen here on Locked On NFL. I'm Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On NFL PM version here in the barbershop, where we use the help of local experts each and every day to give you all the top stories from around the National Football League, and we will not be delayed today. Shout out to the everydayers for joining us wherever they look and watch and hear podcasts. You can see them, you can hear them. Wherever you do that, make sure you don't miss an episode of the show. Today's guest of always, he's not really a guest, he's a resident. That's my man, Kevin Ostracker, KO, with that nice new haircut I see. I can tell when you got a little cut off the side, brother. Here's what we're going to talk about, Kevin and I. The real reason for the combine. A lot of people don't even understand why this thing started, and it's the same reason that most NFL people probably love it and see it and view it a little bit differently than fans and media. We'll talk about that. Is Justin Fields trending to the Jets? We got somebody on our network that seems to think that it's a marriage that needs to happen. Speaking of marriages, Patricia Traina for Locked On Giants gave her opinion on whether the Giants should chase Matthew Stafford. And we'll start right where we said we were going to start off at, with the San Francisco 49ers doing a fact-finding mission at quarterback. I find that very interesting. Kevin Ostracker, you ain't got no quarterback problems up in Baltimore, but, you know, there was a time when you probably had some, and you know how important the quarterback position is around the league.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's why the contracts across today's game are reflecting that. And I think that it's going to be interesting because at some point, something will have to happen. Obviously, the cap keeps going up, so I guess, you know, percentage of that capsule is going to be reserved for those star quarterbacks. Not even star quarterbacks. I mean, we've seen guys that maybe you don't want to pay $100+ million get those $100+ million contracts because teams just don't want to reset at the position. So they will take the mediocrity, I guess is the word I'll use, instead of having to go through a rebuild. And I don't think that's the smartest decision. So, look, unless you have one of the top 5, you can even argue top 10 quarterbacks in the league, should you be handing out those big contracts? I don't know about that, but the way that the league is going these days, if you don't have a quarterback, you're probably not going too far. That's not the case always. I mean, that 2000 Ravens team, you want to talk about the Ravens, they had Trent Dilfer, and that defense carried them all the way to a Super Bowl. But the way that the quarterback position is, all these big money contracts, you know, Sam Darnold's going to get paid a whole heck of a lot of money. And I think for another guy we're going to talk about here, and Mr. Brock Purdy, I mean, that's a whole different conversation when it comes to what he could be getting.
It is. So all of the action, the quarterback action, of course, with the draft upcoming and teams being in the top 5, even the top 7 that need quarterbacks, we're going to dedicate a little bit of more than half the show to quarterbacks. We're going to start off in the NFC West, though, because this conversation got started because the Rams have allowed Matthew Stafford to go out and explore trade opportunities just to see what his value is. And that led for an interesting exchange on Locked On 49ers between Eric Crocker and my man, Brian Peacock. Check this out.
But the Rams are doing something that I've talked about. Maybe the 49ers should do with Brock Purdy, and that's allow him to find his market value. So this is fascinating to me, Croc. And I'm going to relay the information that Tom Pelissero of NFL.com put out there on the Rich Eisen show this week.
Real quick, Peacock, before you get into that, market value, because I continue to see this on social media, but you said something in a previous podcast, and I felt like it's not said enough. We never get to truly see what a quarterback's true market value is. And the only way to find out is to kind of put a quarterback out there and see what teams are willing to potentially give that quarterback before you make your decision on the QB. So whether it's a quarterback or any other position, we typically don't see that. So now you can go into this, but I just wanted to kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
None of these guys, like all these comps for Brock Purdy, what's his contract going to look like? Well, market value is this $1 million. That's not market value because none of those guys saw the market. right? So we don't know what the market value is. And it's weird because certain quarterbacks, I think, might actually, because usually market value means that price goes up. You become a free agent, you have all these teams bidding on you, and the price goes up for your services because you have multiple teams bidding on you and someone's willing to go kind of crazy on that.
All right, that's a good perspective. That's a good point, and technically is correct. If you never hit the open market, you don't really know what your market is. But see, when it's been quarterbacks, KO, they haven't had to hit the market because their agents would come in and just stack their contract based on what the last guy did, and it allows them to reset it. So that is the market. The market is whether you're better than that guy or not, it's your turn. So I agree with this sentiment, but I kind of disagree with it. It'll be really, really weird to see if the 49ers allow Purdy to do that, only to know what they're going to do is match whatever somebody else does. And if people realize that that's what they're doing, well, they'll give him some astronomical number, whether or not they're really interested in doing it or not, and force the 49ers to that's why you just got to be proactive. You got to know the value that he has to your franchise, and he's been in your organization every single day. It's up to you to decide what he means to you and what he doesn't mean to you.
And I think it's about perception too, where I think even if you take into account Sam Darnold in the playoff game, and obviously everybody was ripping on Sam Darnold for that, he's still going to go out there and get that mega contract. And I know that maybe we'd be talking about even a bigger deal if Sam Darnold didn't have that. So for the 49ers and Brock Purdy, it depends on, I think, to me, if he's able to go out there and ball out for the next 5-10 years. San Francisco is loving that investment, assuming he does come back there. But we've seen, for example, like Daniel Jones had a great year in New York. People were wondering, okay, is Daniel Jones really the answer? Not really looking like it. He had a great season, and then New York goes and rewards him with a 3-year, $100+ million contract. So if the 49ers go and pay Brock Purdy, let's just say it's a 5-year deal worth $200 and whatever, maybe even $300 and whatever $million there, is a team even going to want to pay Brock Purdy? Who are the 49ers competing against in that? If Brock doesn't have a great season, he's still going to get paid regardless. But I think it's going to change the perception if Brock doesn't have a good season. And all of a sudden you're kind of sitting there like, well, we kind of have to try to re-sign him.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, okay, it might not work out the way that you want long term, but it's almost like you have to do it, or else what else do you have at the position?
I love analogies, and here's one. It's like you're selling a house, right? You're selling a house because you want one bigger. You think you've outgrown the one that you have. And I don't mean just bigger in size. I mean bigger in whatever you build houses for. But the house you're selling, you kind of had a lot of things done to it that fit you. So then you get this other person, and they're in a whole different bracket financially. They've never owned a home. Well, that 20-year-old house that you're trying to sell, that means a whole lot to them, right? This is their first home. So it's like you're trying to sell them on all of the customizations and the paint and the reason why your house is so good when you're the one trying to get rid of it. It's a weird, real weird dynamic. And what's good for the goose is always what's good for the gander. We're going to talk about quarterbacks in New York. Speaking of teams that are poverty, that have poverty when it comes to quarterbacks, we'll do all of that in just a second here on Locked On NFL. All right, we rolling along here on Locked On NFL. Kevin Ostrowski in here on a Tuesday. I almost said Wednesday again, man. I don't know why I get my days so jacked up. Kevin Ostrowski here on a Wednesday. Joe Shane, I saw him speaking at the Combine at the podium in between me recording two shows, and they sound like they're open for a veteran quarterback, and they sound like they're still open for business to go and draft one. A lot of rumors have them attached to Shedeur Sanders. We'll see how that plays out because you can't believe a whole bunch these days. Him and Brian Daboll may be in a situation where they have to really, really show some progress, and maybe depending on the rookie, it won't give them the mulligan that normal teams get when they play a rookie that early. But Patricia Traina was asked by my man Peter Bukowski if they wanted Matt Stafford. I was shocked at her answer. Check this out.
The reporting is, well, we'd like to keep Matthew Stafford, but if we were going to part with him, it would be a first-round pick, which is normally how these things go. Let's chum the waters here. Do you think this makes sense in New York?
Not for a first-round pick. Absolutely, positively not. If that's what the Rams want, if I'm Giants general manager Joe Shane, I tell them thanks, but no thanks. Although probably he would come up with more colorful language than what's allowed on this program. Stafford for the third overall pick. No, you might as well, if that's what you're going to do, you might as well take, one of the young quarterbacks at that spot. But look, here's the thing with Stafford. He just turned 37 years old. He's had some injuries over the last few years. When he's on, he's on. When he's not, it's disastrous. He's not the long-term answer. And while I think he would be a good bridge quarterback, and I would embrace it if if a third overall pick wasn't part of the deal, I don't think I would go and give up any first-round picks for him.
All right, I probably would agree with her. I would probably try to convince them to do a swap. Like, y'all made the playoffs and we're in the top 3. If we're going to do that, we need to do a swap, because you also have to pay Matthew Stafford a bunch of money. And then you're going to be doing this again 2 or 3 years from now. So I do agree with Patty that that's a little bit of a steep price for a dude his age and with his health issues. But I tell you this, I still think he's a top 10, top 12 quarterback in this league. And it's just funny how teams get so guarded when it comes to those draft picks, man. And now you have a situation where Shane and Daboll have to win, and it's going to be real enticing for them to go out and just reach out and grab a dude that could get them 9 wins.
Yeah, and I think that with the way the fan base obviously wants to start being competitive again, and kind of how miserable it's been over the past, you want to go back as far as you want to with that for the Giants. I think that they need something, but I agree with Patricia where it's like you're not giving up a top 5 pick for a player that, you're right, is you're going to have to do this whole dance again in 2 seasons, and you could have a generational talent for the next 10 to 15 years for your franchise with that selection. I think that Stafford, he makes more sense for a more win now team. I mean, a team like a Pittsburgh, even I know we're going to talk about the other New York team, I know in a second, but even the Jets make more sense to me than the Giants do with Matthew Stafford, because I just don't, unless the Giants go out there and just like revamp a bunch of stuff, which I think they're going to do to an extent, what win now pieces do they have outside of guys like Malik Neighbors and a couple other guys, Kayvon Thibodeau, et cetera, et cetera? I think that Stafford, he's a great quarterback, but can he lift up that talent? He would lift up talent, but how much talent can he lift up to make the Giants a real Super Bowl contender at this stage and what they need? I just think they need way too much to go and make that move for a quarterback, especially like Patricia said, giving up a top 5 pick, I don't think is anywhere in the cards for him.
Yeah, if they had Saquon Barkley, I'd say go for it, but they don't. And they don't have Saquon Barkley because they let Saquon Barkley go to the Philadelphia Eagles, who just won the Super Bowl. I agree that Pittsburgh is the type of destination for a guy like Matthew Stafford. I think it's the perfect situation for him. Even the Raiders would be a good situation for Matthew Stafford, in my opinion, with Pete Carroll going out to Las Vegas. So, I understand her position. It's just that when you're quarterback needy and your coach and your GM might get fired, you might be willing to do anything to get some wins. Speaking of wins, the Jets didn't have a lot of them over the last couple of years, and they too are in need of a quarterback. And there's an interesting irony to the person that my man John Lee Butchko says might be leading the race to be the Jets quarterback in 2025.
It sounds like a favorite may have emerged over the last couple of days. And this is nothing official. It's just kind of reading between the lines from what numerous reporters are saying. Zach Rosenblatt of The Athletic, who increasingly seems like a well-connected reporter on Jets matters, indicated there's a lot of mutual interest between the Jets and Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback Justin Fields, who's going to be a free agent after the season. There's a journalist from the city of Pittsburgh who put the odds at Fields and the Jets over 50% right now. Now, nothing's official yet, of course. We are still a couple of weeks away from the official start of free agency. So a lot can change between them then and now. But it feels like at this point, if you were to guess who's the starting quarterback will be for the Jets in 2025, Justin Fields would have a pretty decent shot at being the guy. And there's some irony in this because 4 years ago, we were talking about the Jets potentially picking Fields with the 2nd overall pick. And of course, that did not happen. The Jets opted for Zach Wilson instead. Fields ended up going to the Chicago Bears. The Bears traded up in that draft for Fields. And I think it's fair to say things did not really work out for either team.
Normally, teams give up on guys like Justin Fields, right? And you can say that this will be the second team that's already done that. But he's always going to be given a shot, I believe, because of Lamar Jackson and the similarities and the athleticism and the things that he could bring to the table. A lot of people will look at Jalen Hurts and think that that is the same thing. It's not. It's not. Both of those guys have really, really improved with their anticipatory throwing, and that's Justin Fields' downfall, according to a lot of people. Do you think this will work? Do you think that they could, and I wouldn't even say Jared Goff him the way Detroit did when Aaron Glenn was there, because Goff at least went to a Super Bowl when he was with the Rams. They just felt like he couldn't take them a little bit further. What's the chance of Justin Fields going to New York, to the Jets, where everyone thought he was going to go anyway, and actually having the chance to be successful, in your opinion?
I think it's possible. And I think partially what could happen there is with Garrett Wilson. I don't think Devontae Adams is staying there, but like if they can go in and get another wide receiver next to Garrett Wilson, you have Breece Hall in that offense too. I think it could make for a dynamic trio there. Now, does that mean Justin Fields is going to turn into a top 5 quarterback overnight? Probably not. But with the way that defense is expected to perform, I know it didn't necessarily do that last season, but the way they're expected to perform, they don't need to have a top 5 quarterback. But the issue was Aaron Rodgers ended up hurting them more than helping them in more ways than one. Whereas you just need somebody in Justin Fields. I know the word game manager or the phrase game manager gets a bad rep nowadays of like, if you get called a game manager, you're a terrible quarterback. That's not the case, because some teams just need that. Now, I think that depending on how the Jets maneuver through this offseason, they might need a little more than Justin Fields, but if he can take a step, we know the athletic ability is there, but you mentioned it, Wig. It's just a matter of, can he get the anticipatory throws down and figure out that part of his game? Having a guy like Garrett Wilson certainly helps. Having a running back like Breece Hall, if they can get their offensive line right, I think it could be a good match, but I would probably temper expectations a little bit, because much like we talked about with the Giants, they still have so many other things they have to figure out, where I don't think a player like Justin Fields is going to automatically come in there and elevate the Jets to AFC East favorites over the Bills or top Super Bowl contenders like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Pittsburgh needs a quarterback. We just talked about them possibly being in the hunt for Matthew Stafford. They got a young guy, 23, 24 years old, right there in-house, and they're willing to part ways with him. And you have to look at that and go, people are giving quarterbacks a bunch of money that are average players. Why would you just part ways with a young kid if there was something there that you saw? And Pittsburgh is a pretty good metric to use as an organization for what they think will work and what won't. The Tampa Bay Bucks, folks don't realize something. Before Washington went on that big run in the playoffs, the Bucks just about had them beat. In fact, we would argue that if Baker Mayfield doesn't fumble the ball, or whoever was responsible for fumbling that ball with 4 or 5 minutes left, they beat Washington if they retain that ball. So they're very, very close. I think they're going to be real busy in free agency. So we'll get to free agency and the combine. Can the Bucks add one more player? And then we'll tell you the real reason for the combine, where everybody is. We'll do that in the third segment here on Locked On NFL. Lost in the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles absolutely blew the doors off the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl, and lost in the halftime performance with Kendrick versus Drake, and lost in Jaden Daniels and playing so well, and Lamar didn't do it again, and all of these stories that you got from the NFL. Lost in all of this stuff is the fact that Tampa was a real scary team in the playoffs, and they lost the game to Washington that they probably kicking themselves because they probably should have won it. How close can they be to challenging the Eagles, the Lions, or whoever else everybody is trying to raise up in the NFC? Well, they can add some players in free agency. Their needs are very. Listen to my man James Yarcho as he talks to his guest about what the Bucks can do.
Do you feel like the Bucks are going to be buyers in the trade market when the new league year opens? I mean, is it a pipe dream for people to sit here and talk about Myles Garrett or Trey Hendrickson being on the Buccaneers?
Normally, I would say no. He really values draft picks so much. He and his staff have an eye on the future. as well as the president. But in this case, I know for a fact that ownership believes that Baker Mayfield is your franchise quarterback. They got him. It's so hard to get that. It starts there, and they got him. And they got the offensive line. And Bucky Irving. And they got Evans. McMillan they like. They'll probably get another receiver. You need an edge. You need an edge. Yes, you need a corner. Yes, you're going to need inside linebackers. So my thing is, James, this is one of those cases where I believe. Remember when they got the GOAT, they went all in, and I think that they're at that point.
Cannot disagree with them. They were Mike Bergonzi, the GM, the new GM for the Titans, was on the podium at the combine, and they asked him about all the positions. He said he liked the edge. Well, he liked the defensive line. He said particularly the edge. So Tampa will have a decent opportunity and a shot to get a really, really good football player to help their team, and maybe they can go out in free agency and patch up some other things. I think the Bucs are being overlooked a little bit moving forward.
Yeah, I think that especially in that NFC South division where you're wondering, all right, who is the clear favorite there? The answer is we don't know that answer. I mean, Tampa obviously has been a team that with Baker Mayfield that he has turned that franchise around in terms of, not they won a Super Bowl. I'm not saying they were bad, but like they were looking for a long-term answer. Tom Brady was there. He wasn't a long-term answer. They have found that in Baker Mayfield, almost kind of stumbled upon him, and they said, hey, we're going to take a shot on this guy, and it worked out. But I agree, whereas like you do have the talent there. It's like Bucky Irving is great. Obviously, you pair him with a guy like Rashad White, Mike Evans. We know Chris Godwin's a free agent, but what is that going to look like? Does he come back? Does he not? I think to me, though, with Tampa, who is your competition in that NFC South right now? Right now as we speak, I think Atlanta, a lot of people are looking for a jump in year 2 by Michael Penix, but that's not a guarantee. That's just what people are expecting. Atlanta has a lot of talent, but can they put it all together? That's the big question there. New Orleans is probably going to have to go through a pretty lengthy rebuild, and we know Ross Jackson over there at Locked On Saints with his negative $1 billion in cap space every single season. And then Carolina, we saw some flashes from Bryce Young, but how far away are they? They probably have a couple more years to go too. So I think that for Tampa, the whole conversation is correct, where they, to me, are the NFC South favorites, but it's about getting to the next level, getting to that next step of competing with the Phillies, the Washingtons. And I think that they are on that track, but they do need to add a couple more pieces to be there, because I think that they're not as far off as people think they are, but they still have a little bit of ways to go.
They have a little ways to go, but let me tell you, there's 3 games on their schedule last year that I'm looking at. 2 were in September, and 1 was in November. They lost in November at Kansas City, 30-24. It was a very, very competitive game. I remember watching it. But in a 2-week period, or in a 3-week period back in September, they went on the road and they beat Detroit, and then they thumped Philly in Tampa. That's pretty good. Now, when you consider they also lost 26-7 at home to the Broncos, that's where you start getting into that variance and those ideas about, are they going to be good enough? I think they have a chance to be, even though people criticize Todd Bowles. They lost their offensive coordinator for the 2nd straight years. The Jaguars hired Liam Cohen after losing Dave Canales the year before. So it's going to be a real big question. I know everybody is in India. A lot of our teammates from the Locked On network and everybody else in the football world is in Indy. I chose to go to Mobile. I can't go to everything, to the Senior Bowl. However, I think we lose sight of what the real reason is for the combine. And we expect things to happen that teams aren't even looking forward to happening. And in fact, there were a lot of people who didn't even send coaches for a long time to the combine, or the coaches would go and then they'd leave after doing a press conference or whatever. Listen to Matt Williamson, who from the Peacock and Williamson podcast, and he's the guest here on Friday with us on Locked On NFL. And it blew my mind because I realized it was something like this, but I did not realize the real true meaning of why they started the combine. And this reason still exists for owners in the National Football League.
He says, which prospects have the most to gain from the combine? Do the fans make more of a deal out of the scouting combine than the general managers in the NFL?
Maybe. Certainly out of the 40s and whatnot. Just pure numbers. Did he run a 4.39 or a 4.42? That type of stuff. Now, I think I do this every year, we must remind people why the combine was created in the first place. First of all, Indianapolis is the perfect town for it. I can't wait to go. And something like 18 different franchises can drive there. I mean, I drive there. It's like a 5-hour drive from Pittsburgh, but it's centrally located. It's a convention city. It's flat. You don't have to go outside. It's great. So it's perfect for it. I hope they never move it. But the biggest reason the combine was created was medical. Instead of bringing all these guys to 32 different cities, you bring them all to one and you bring all the doctors to Indy and you dig in the medical. That still is the number one important thing. And we never get all that information, but never, ever, ever forget that.
I don't forget it, and I can understand it. It's one thing, people think these guys get sick of getting interviewed. No. What's worse is to get picked, poked, and prodded by 32 teams as opposed to just having one huge medical exam. And if somebody has questions, they have questions. That's the real reason for the combine. It ain't necessarily because of a 3-cone or a 40 time, because GMs more than likely will depend on tape more than they'll depend on anything else.
Yeah, and I know that the whole drills and everything, certain teams value it more than other teams. I know RAS scores have become very popular and athleticism and whatnot, but I know that we've heard a lot of stories of a player, you think this guy's going to go in the top 10, top 15, and all of a sudden a medical flag pops up at the combine or, right before the draft happens, and all of a sudden that guy free falls. And sometimes those medical concerns are well placed, other times not so much, and it doesn't really impact a guy. And it's interesting because you're right. It's a lot different than just having a big medical exam and then all of a sudden, you're done. You got to go through this long process and you got to go through everybody asking questions and everybody evaluating. And that can be very tiring. Yeah, 100% is. So I know that the combine is it's a big event every single season at Indianapolis, as Matt said, does a great job of pulling it off every single season. But, for me covering the Ravens, for example, they're a team that, they take it into account, but they're not going to go out there like for Kyle Hamilton, for example, who was a consensus top 5 guy, ran the 40 a little slowly. And all of a sudden teams like, well, if a guy can't run in a straight line, I guess he's not going to be a good NFL player. And here we are as one of the best, not only safeties, but defensive players in the NFL. So my thing with the combine is just for these teams, don't overthink it. You can put it into your box of things that you evaluate guys based off of, especially when you talk about the medical stuff. But I wouldn't overthink it unless there is something huge with the drill component of it that goes on.
It's amazing, man. You talk about Baltimore, and I just get upset because they sat there and just waited for him. They sat there and just waited for Lamar. They sat there and they waited for just about all of these other dudes. Zay Flowers was a late guy pick. They sat there and waited for that little corner Wiggins that's got my last name that's running around out there from Clemson. It's like, when are y'all going to learn, man? The Eagles and the Ravens, they just sit there and wait for everybody else to make mistakes, and they just keep getting these good players while the bad teams keep reaching for the stars and having things not work out. I tell you what'll work out, man, is us here on Locked On NFL every day. We actually get it in twice. That's right. Tyler Rowland in the morning. He'll hit you upside your head like a double shot of espresso. Trust me, the madman is like that. And you come back by here in the barbershop, man, and you know what you get. We're just going to try to poke around in people's business until we find something to laugh at. All right, for Kevin Ostracker, for Tony Wiggins, make sure you tap in during Combine Week to all of our Locked On programming across our network. Everyone's doing a superb job. A lot of guys are up there in Indianapolis, and they have the breaking stories. We'll make sure we give them to you here on Locked On NFL. Until next time, y'all take care. We'll see you later.
The barbershop is open and Tony Wiggins has a